Hi, and welcome to the Microsoft product licensing update for August 2023 with the version 1 software asset management team. How's everybody doing today?
Very well, thank you.
Very good, Carl.
Good, thanks, Karen.
Great. So a few updates this month we're going to run through quickly, some material ones. I'll kick things off with the first announcement in the August product terms, which was a pretty material one. I think it's fair to say, and interesting to see Microsoft making life a little bit easier for AWS customers. So as of the 1st of August, customers can now run Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise or business, as well as project and Visio on Amazon Workspaces. So for those who aren't familiar with Amazon Workspace are like a cloud-based virtual desktops, or what's also known as desktop as a service. So in effect, what AWS are allowing, or what should I say, Microsoft are allowing AWS customers to do now is to install Microsoft apps, 365 apps for enterprise or business, as well as project and Visio on a cloud desktop. And this was something that actually wasn't allowed in the past. And I think some customers may have even overlooked this. And I think it's actually questionable as to, did Microsoft ever allow this? I know everyone is probably familiar with some of the key licensing changes Microsoft made in October 2019, where how Microsoft licenses could be brought to AWS and other cloud vendors licensing, or other cloud vendors slightly changed. So I suppose this is a welcome announcement here. I suppose there's a couple of key things to call out. First of all, is that in order to bring or to use or install apps for enterprise or business on a workspace cloud desktop, there's a couple of prerequisites. So you need to have a Microsoft 365 E3, E5, or A3 or A5, I think, if I remember them all correctly, as well as Microsoft 365 Business Premium. So that's obviously, will include a lot of customers, but there's also going to be some customers out there who perhaps haven't made that step up to a full fat Microsoft 365 subscription, and they may have Office 365 subscriptions. So if you're still licensing your productivity tools primarily through Office 365 and you haven't fully licensed with M365, obviously that's going to be a blocker in terms of being able to deploy the software on a workspace virtual desktop. Also, if you're looking to run Project Plan 3, or if you have Project Plan 3 or Project Plan 5, as well as Visio Plan 2, that'll also allows you to install Project and Visio on those Amazon Workspaces. So an interesting development from Microsoft to see, an additional layer of flexibility in terms of BYOL rights on AWS, which would be interesting to see if we see some similar approaches across other products in the future. Outside of that, there was only one other brief announcement just on Dynamics 365 services. So slight update to the product terms this month where purchasing minimums were updated, and they've removed the ability to combine licenses to meet minimum requirements. So if you're a Dynamics 365 customer, worth having a look at some of those little changes that have taken place that might impact on your organization in the future, or if you're evaluating Dynamics 365 now, there might be some material impact there to consider. So with that, I think, Richard, you looked at a couple of the privacy and security term updates, as well as some of the universal license term updates for online services. So do you want to give us a quick rundown and what were the updates there?
Yeah, so I'll probably just take them as they come in the product terms update. So the first one is the universal license terms for online services. So the description is universal term for online services added in relation to Azure Meter availability and applicable terms. What is Azure Meter? Basically, this is what is used to track resource usage and generate a usage record that is then used to calculate your bill. So the addition or the term that was added basically says first party consumption services may be available for purchase as Azure Meters, which allows customers to pay as you go for certain online services as outlined in the Microsoft Azure Payments and Fees clause and Purchasing Microsoft Azure Services clause. So essentially, they've just added terms in here for what they use to track what you use in Azure. Not a biggie, just an additional inclusion of license terms for Azure meters. The second one I looked at was the privacy and security terms for Azure Core Services to include Azure Container Apps. And this makes sense if you're aware or if you're familiar with containerization and how it works. Azure Container Apps is part of that whole model. So what is Azure Container App? It's simply a serverless application hosting service where users do not see or manage underlying VMs, orchestrators, or other cloud infrastructure. So basically, they're bringing this Azure Container App into the Azure Core Services. With this move, Microsoft include Azure Container App into the Azure Core Services, which already includes Azure Container Registry, Azure Kubernetes, and Azure Red Hat OpenShift, which all fall into the containerization family. Essentially, this changes brings it in line with the rest of the container products that Microsoft has already moved into Azure Core Services. So not an unusual change. It was expected. It was just a little bit slower than maybe expected.
Very good. Niamh, anything interesting from your side?
Yeah, a couple of updates to kind of availability tables, and the first one being the Office 365 suites. So Microsoft have removed Office 365 F3 from the enterprise agreement or enterprise agreement subscription, MPSA, and it's only available now through MCA or like CSP. So that's interesting. I guess there mustn't be kind of much demand for an Office 365 F3 compared to possibly a Microsoft 365 F3 under those like large customer kind of agreements. So that's the announcement on Office 365 F3. The second kind of update then was Windows Desktop Operating System, where Microsoft have added, the Windows 10 Internet of Things, so IoT Enterprise Long-Term Servicing Channel per device. That's been added to Microsoft Customer Agreement, MPSA, and Select and Select Plus availability tables. So I kind of had a look at the Internet of Things and what that was kind of like about, and why it wouldn't be kind of under an enterprise agreement, but I guess because Internet of Things, generally those kind of speciality devices, they're kind of found in, banking, healthcare, hospitality, manufacturing, retail, and they have a certain kind of regulatory certification, but they're isolated generally. You generally wouldn't find them on, kind of the main sort of company domain. And I guess they can, so the difference between kind of a Windows IoT enterprise device is that it receives 10 years of servicing and support from upgrading one version of Windows IoT enterprise to the next, would require a new license. So it really does, like, I guess it's not something you would probably license on on an enterprise agreement. I presume maybe that's probably the reason why it's available only through MCA, MPSA, and so on. So yeah, so they were the two kind of interesting removals and additions to the availability tables this month. Thanks, Carl.
It's pretty good. A 10-year support cycle is pretty good to publish, because I think one of the things that I've noticed, if you look at even smart devices in the home, in many cases it's actually quite hard to find how long those products will be supported for. So having a 10-year support life cycle on an IoT device pretty good, right? So so that's interesting. So William, over to you. Anything pique your interest in this month's product terms?
Well, three things, I suppose. So the first one's Microsoft Azure. So they've added language to the Azure customer solution regarding customer responsibility in obtaining the necessary licenses related to standards. So essentially, they're reinforcing the point that if you create an Azure customer solution and deploy it, then the customer or the person creating it is responsible for the correctly licensed use of third-party software that builds as part of that solution, not Microsoft. So they're quite they are very stated in the fact that they are not responsible in any which way for any infringement of licensing rules of third-party products when deployed as an Azure customer solution. So I suppose this there was an example where HashiCorp just released announcement that some of their software is going from open source to a business source license, which basically means that new versions will have to be purchased if used in a commercial environment. That's the sort of thing that comes into this Azure customer solution. So if you're using Terraform to build out VMs, or then the person doing that or the organization doing that has to be responsible for the licensing and not Microsoft. The other one was Microsoft 365. So they've added Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management, brackets user SL, close brackets, to the EES and EA and EAS, and added MCA to table, availability table, as well as the Microsoft Defender Threat Intelligence API to the EES table. And then the other part for that is they've updated Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management add-on, adding Microsoft 365 A5 security and removing Defender for Endpoint P2 device from the table. So just as they start to evolve the Defender product suite, I think we're going to get a few of these changes being added to and taken away from the availability tables. And the final one, very quickly, is Power Platform. So the only real thing is they've changed the name of Power Apps per user to Power Apps Premium. All entitlement features, functions remain exactly the same. It's just a change of name. And the final one on that is the adding of Power Automate Process Mining to the availability and prerequisites table. So this is process mining is essentially it's a tool that helps to discover insights and optimization opportunities with easy to use web and desktop experiences for data ingestion, predefined reports, and more. But there's absolutely no information on how to license or what it costs. So it's just in private preview at the moment.
Interesting enough, I heard a customer kept referring to Power Apps per user as Power Apps Premium.
Yeah.
And this is going back now, over the last maybe 2 months ago.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
So I was kind of, are they getting confused, or maybe someone from Microsoft might have told them that this is,
I think the websites were showing it as Power Apps Premium in advance of it actually being released.
Yeah.
And as they do. So I think that's.
Yeah. So it's very much a rebrand more than anything else. I know, and again, I think it was announced at Inspire just a few weeks back, the naming changes. On Power Automate Process Mining, the add-on license, I think it features 100 gig off the top of my head. It features 100 gig of storage at a cost of $5,000 per tenant per month.
Okay, so at a tenant-wide level,
so but still early doors on it, right? So
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see what that changes. So I think that pretty much wraps us up for the August product terms update. So absolutely interesting month. Usually it's kind of somewhat of a quiet month, but there's a few useful changes there have taken place of note. So if you have any Microsoft related queries, or for that matter, any software licensing queries in general, please feel free to reach out to the software asset management team here at Version 1. Until next month's Microsoft product terms update, we'll see you then, and do keep an eye out for some of the forthcoming blogs and fireside chats that we release over the coming weeks. Until then, thanks everybody.
Thank you.